Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding Mishnah Berurah Chelik Beis, and Mir Hashem today we will be learning Daf Nun Zayin Amid Aleph. We are continuing to learn Hilchos Netillas Yadayim. Today's learning should be a schus refuah shalema for Meir ben Chai Sarah, who's in need of Rachem and Shamayim, and of course, all of our learning and our davening should be a schus for Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael, Hanusunim Bar Tzara Ubar Shivya, including the soldiers with boots on the ground, and all the volunteers that are in Makom Sakana, all the residents that are in Makom Sakana in Eretz Yisrael, and not only in Eretz Yisrael, but around the world. All of our learning and our davening should be a continued schus on behalf of Gans Klal Yisrael. So, we've been learning this very, very complex sugya here in the Netillas Yadayim, the question of Hakbah, the question of the need to raise your hand at some point during the performance of Netillas Yadayim. So we've gone through a lot of the nitty-gritty of this over the past two shiurim. I'm going to try not to just go over the same concepts again and again. Today's shiur here on Nun Zayin Amud Aleph is really far simpler once we've laid the foundation for understanding what's at play over here. So now it's just really chazara and just getting into some fine detail here on Nun Zayin Amud Aleph, a lot of repetition of what we've seen over the last 2 days. But there is just one thing that I want to make sure we have clear before we go into the Mechaber, Ramah, and Mishnah Berurah here on Nun Zayin Amud Aleph. And that is, back on Nun Vav Amud Beis, in the very beginning of Siman Kuf Samach Beis, the Chavetz Chaim Kedarkai B'Kodesh, and by the way, we're going to see a lot more of this, Mirz Hashem, when we get into Chelik Gimel with Hilchos Shabbos. We have those places where the Chavetz Chaim gives us a beautiful hakdama, a beautiful preface to the Siman that really lays the groundwork of the Siman. And the Chavetz Chaim did that for us here in this complex Siman, here in Siman Kuf Samach Beis in Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Aleph. One of the things that the Mishnah Berurah told us in his Hakdama, in Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Aleph, he pointed out to us a major machlokes rishonim that has great bearing on this need to lift up your hands during the Netillas Yadayim. We're going to refer to those shittas kind of the way the Mishnah Berurah does, which is the first opinion is Roiv HaMefarshim. The second one is really Shitas HaRashba. Now, the groundwork for that machlokes rishonim was really spelled out in Siman Kuf Samach Aleph Sif Daled, all the way at the end of Siman Kuf Samach Aleph, where we saw that we have two shitas until where on the hand must you wash the Netillas Yadayim. We have one shita that says we wash the Netillas Yadayim ad haperek, until the wrist. We have another shita, Shita Sarashba, that says that we wash the Netillas Yadayim ad kishrei etzba'osav, until the knuckles, the point at which the fingers connect to the palm of the hand. Now, both according to the Yesh B'Farshim and according to the Shita Sarashba, there is an inyan, there is a concept of the need to lift up your hands somewhat during the performance of the Netillas Yadayim. Neither one of these Shitas Rishonim can deny that because it's based on a Brisa in Masechtas Sotah, so it predates the machlokes Rishonim. Each Shita of the Rishonim have to have an understanding why there's a need for this Hagbah, and both of them do. But the need for the Hagbah and the severity of it is somewhat different between the Yesh B'Farshim and the Shitas HaRashba. In brief, according to the Roiv HaMefarshim, the reason you're going to wash the Netillas Yadayim ad haperek, you're going to wash the Netillas Yadayim until the wrist. The reason why there's a need for Hagbah, to lift up the hand, is because when you wash the Mayim HaRishonim, we're afraid that some water picked up Tumah from the hand, flowed back onto the wrist, and now you have Tamei Mayim HaRishonim on the wrist. Now you're going to wash Mayim Shneim. Mayim Shneim is going to be matar all of the Mayim Rishonim that has Tumah that's on the hand. but it cannot be metaher tamei mayim rishonim that's beyond the wrist, because that's out of the jurisdiction of the Netillas Yadayim. Now the fear is that should your hand be cast downwards, that mayim rishonim that has tuma might flow back onto the hand and be re-metame the hand. Now let's analyze that for a second. In order for this to be a problem, how many things need to go wrong? Well, the first thing that needs to go wrong is that when you wash mayim harishonim, some of the water has to backflow onto your wrist. Now realize, and I mentioned this yesterday, there's no problem if you wash mayim harishonim with an excess amount of water, and you wash and you pour mayim harishonim on your forearm. The water that lands on your forearm from the cup, from the kais of the Netillas Yadayim, is not going to pick up tumah from the forearm, because the Chazal will never geyser tumah on the forearm. The Chazal were only geyser tumah on the hand. So what's the risk? The risk is not that you're going to overpour on the wrist, and then some of the water that you overpoured on the wrist is going to flow back on the hand. That's not the concern. The concern is that water that you poured onto your hand, that water picked up tumah from your hand, that water might backflow onto your wrist. So that's the first thing that has to go wrong. The first thing that has to go wrong, water has to flow, mayim rishonim water has to flow from your hand to the wrist. The next thing that has to go wrong is that water then flows from the forearm back onto the hand. But if it flows back onto the hand before you wash mayim shniyim, it's not a problem. If that water is back on the hand when you wash mayim shniyim will take care of it. Mayim shniyim will be matarit. So the only time there's a problem is if it flows back onto your hand after mayim shniyim. Or the Mishnah Berurah threw out yesterday, he said, also technically there could be a problem if it flows back onto your hand while you're washing mayim shniyim, maybe right after you poured the mayim shniyim, it'll flow back onto your hand and it'll be metame the mayim shniyim. So because of this problem, what does the Brisa B'Sechta Saita say? The Brisa B'Sechta Saita says, wash mayim rishonim, then wash mayim shniyim, and right away elevate your hand. Elevate your hand. That way, if there is any problematic tamei mayim rishonim water on your forearm, it won't be able to flow back onto your hand because your hand is cast upward. And then you'll take a towel and you'll dry it off, and that'll be the end of the problem. So that's the problem and the solution to the problem, according to the Rav HaMefarshim. Now, according to the Rashba, the risk is a much greater risk. According to the Rashba, the risk is a much more severe risk. Why? Because according to the Rashba, you only wash the Netillas Yadayim ad kishrei etzba'isaf. However, even the Rashba agrees that the area of your hand from the kishrei etzba'isaf till the wrist, the palm of the hand, does convey tumah. Chazal will geyser shniyim l'tumah on the entire hand, including the palm. Just the Rashba holds that for the Netillas Yadayim purposes, you don't have to wash the palm. You only have to wash the fingers. But now, according to the Rashba, we can see right away the risk is a much greater risk. Why? Because according to the Rav HaMefarshim, the whole problem only starts if water, mayim rishonim water, flows. Really, there's no purpose for there to be water past the wrist. Why is there any water past the wrist? And if you overpoured water onto your forearm, that's also not a problem. The whole problem only starts, according to the Rav HaMefarshim, if you poured water onto the hand and it flowed back onto the forearm. According to the Rashba, you almost absolutely have a problem. Why? Because according to the Rashba, you're washing the Netillas Yadayim at kishrei etzba'isaf. Let me ask you something. How many times did you have the problem on Tisha B'Av or on Yom Kippur when we paskin, when there's an Isser Rechitza, and we paskin the only wash at kishrei etzba'isaf? So you go to wash Degel Aser, and you try to pour ad Kishrei Etzba'osav. And almost inevitably, a little bit of water ends up going beyond Kishrei Etzba'osav onto the palm of your hand. I mean, unless you're using something with a tiny little spout, how on earth are you supposed to be mitzamtzem that absolutely no water goes beyond Kishrei Etzba'osav? So according to the Rashba, you're going to wash the Netillas Yadayim. It's almost inevitable that you are going to overwash your hand. You're going to pour water beyond Kishrei Etzba'osav. That water is going to hit the palm of your hand. That water is going to become tameh. So almost inevitably, according to the Rashba, you're going to have this problem of having mayim tameim, mayim arishonim that are tameh on your hand. And not only that, they're on your hand in an area where you're not mechuyev to wash mayim shneim, right? You over-poured water on your hand. So water went here for the mayim arishonim. All of that water from here to here picks up tumah from the palm of the hand. Now you got to wash mayim shneim. But when you wash mayim shneim, you're only focused on washing mayim shneim at kishrei etzba'osav, because that's the halacha. So who says that you're going to wash mayim shneim over here? If you don't wash mayim shneim over here, then the mayim rishonim water that landed over here is tameh, and the chances of it flowing back onto your fingers, if you don't pick up your hand, are very, very great. Not only that, there's even another problem. Let's say you're very careful. So you go ahead and you wash mayim rishonim, and you see that you poured mayim rishonim up to here. So you say to yourself, I'm going to be very careful now. I'm going to make sure that I also pour mayim shneim up to here. Well, when you're focused on washing mayim shneim up to here, what are the chances that some of that mayim shneim are going to go up to here? Very good. And any mayim shneim that go beyond where the first mayim rishonim went, pick up tumah from the palm of the hand where mayim rishonim never hit. So you see now that according to the Rashba, the severity of this chash is much greater than it is according to the Rav HaMefarshim. According to the Rashba, it's almost inevitable that you're going to have this issue. And that's why, according to the Rashba, the need for Hagbah is much greater than it is according to the Rav HaMefarshim. But there's a silver lining to that cloud. And what is that? If you paskin like the Rashba, which the Mechaber seemingly paskins like the Rashba, if you paskin like the Rashba, but you're makbid to wash ad a perik, so you paskin like the Rashba, but you are careful to wash all the way up to the perik. You wash all the way up to the wrist. Then, according to the Rashba, there's no risk at all. Why? Because the Rashba holds that if you wash ad a perik, he doesn't believe in this whole chash of mayim, of tamei mayim or rishonim that might flow back onto the hand. You know why? Because the Rashba holds, again, what is that whole chash predicated on? That whole chash is predicated on the idea that some of the mayim or rishonim water is going to flow back onto the forearm, and then after mayim shniyim, it's going to go flow back onto the hand. Says the Rashba, too far-fetched. The Rashba says it's too far-fetched of a chash. He's not masking to such a chash. So what you end up with is like this. If you paskin like the Rav HaMefarshim that you have to wash ad a perek, then pshat in the brisa insight is that we're chayshish that water is going to flow off the hand onto the forearm and then on back. Okay, it's a vayt chash, but it is a chash, and that's why we said you need hakbas yadayim. If you paskin like the Rashba, the chash is a much more severe chash. So this need for hagbah is much more chomer according to the Rashba than according to the Rav HaMefarshim. However, if you paskin like the Rashba, but you're noyeg like the Rav HaMefarshim to wash out a perek, then you have no problem at all. Because then the Rashba says, vayt chash. I'm not maskim to that chash. So if you paskin like the Rashba, where really mikra adin, you only have to wash at kishrei etzba'osav, and you paskin like the Rashba that he's not worried about this chash, beyond the wrist, and you're noyig to wash it till the wrist, you have no problem. Bear that all in mind, and today's daf becomes very simple. So, let's try to modify the voice a little bit, which you know already is not easy for me. And let's pick up from where we left off. So, we're up to the very top of Nun Zayin Amud Aleph. That's really where we ended off. We're up to the Mechaber, Shalo Yetzu, but that's in the middle of a sentence. So, I'm just going to read from the beginning of Sif Aleph in the Mechaber. HaNoitel, when one washes Netillas Yadayim, Tzarech lahagbiya yodav, he needs to lift up his hands, Dahainu Roshei etzba'osav, meaning his fingertips. And we saw two pshatim in the Mishnah Berurah on what that means. One pshat in the Mishnah Berurah was that here the Ramah is signaling that the Mechaber really paskins like the Rashba, and therefore when the Mechaber speaks about doing Hagba, being Magbiya the hands, he's really only referring to the fingers. He's not referring to the whole hand, because again, according to the Rashba, the whole worry is that some of the water is going to flow back onto the fingers, because really you only have to wash the fingers. So that's why, says the Ramah, when the Mechaber says Tzarech lahagbiya yodav, he means the fingers. That was one pshat that Mishnah Berurah gave. The other pshat is, let's not be too OCD about the words of the Ramah. When the Ramah means that you lift up Roshei etzba'osav, what he means is you cast your whole hand upwards so that your fingertips are pointing up. Let's continue now in Zayin Amud Aleph. Why is there a need to be Magbiya es hayodayim? Why is there a need to lift up the hands? So the Mechaber says, Shelo yetzu mayim chutz laperek, because we're afraid that water may travel onto the forearm beyond the wrist, v'yachzeru v'yitamu es hayodayim, and then that water might flow back and be re-mitame the hands. Okay, says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Cotton, hey. Shala Yetzu, Ritzayna Loimar. What the Mechaber wants to say is, Deshema Yetzu Amayim Arishayim Atameim Chutz Laperek. The fear over here is that some Mayim Arishayim that landed on the hand and picked up Tumah from the hand might flow back onto the forearm. And now if you don't lift up your hand, Yachzeru Hamayim Lamata, the water will flow back down from the forehand onto the hand, from the forearm onto the hand, V'yitamo Yadayim, and be re-mitame the hands, V'chanal, like we saw previously. And therefore the Eitzah is wash by Marishonim, right? So let's say some water went up, okay, wash by Marishonim. Now wash Mayim Shniyim. If any water came down off the forearm onto the hand before you washed Mayim Shniyim, the Mayim Shniyim will take care of it. And now right after you wash Mayim Shniyim, pick your hand up. That way no more water could possibly flow back from the forearm onto the hand and cause a Tumah problem. All right, let's go weiter now, back in the Shulchan Aruch. Let's see the Ramah. Haga, says the Ramah, I have another Eitzah for you. The Mechaber's Eitzah is pick up your hand. Says the Ramah, I have another Eitzah for you. Haga, for Huadin, you would accomplish the same thing. Im mashpilon, if you keep your hands casted downward, mitchilas hanetila, from the beginning of the performance of Netillas Yadayim, ad soifa, until the end of Netillas Yadayim, to shaper dummy. That would also work. What does the Ramah mean? The Ramah is being very simple. The Ramah says, listen, our great enemy over here is gravity, right? That's what we're worried about. We're worried about water flowing back down onto the hand. So the Mechaber's Eitzah was, you washed Mayim Arishonim, and now we're worried that Tameh, after you washed Mayim Rishonim, some of the Mayim Rishonim flowed from your hand onto your forearm. Well, in order for that to happen, obviously your hand must have been up, right? If your hand was down like this from the beginning, and you washed Netillas Yadayim, it is absolutely impossible for water to flow from your hand up onto your forearm. Gravity dictates that the water is going to flow down. So if we're worried, and again, remember, we're not worried that you overpoured and you poured water onto your forearm, because the water can't pick up tumah for the forearm. There's only tumah on the hand. So if your hand was down when you made the initial pour of the mayim rishonim, there's no chash. There's no possibility of water flowing from the hand onto the forearm. So if the mechaber, and really the Bryce in Saita, has such a chash, it must be that your hand at some point was up. And therefore there's this question that Tamei Mayim Rishonim may have flowed down onto your forearm. So says the Ramah, I have a very simple answer for you. Instead of this whole question of, Makbiyas Yadayim, just keep your hand down the whole time from beginning to end and just wash Mayim Rishonim and then wash Mayim Shneim and everything is fine. If you keep your hand casted downward from the beginning of Netillas Yadayim until the end, you're fine. And we don't need to be going through all of this complexity. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cutting Vav. V'huadin im mashpilon. The kevan de hishpilon metchilas anitilas shamayim rishonim. Because if you follow the advice of the Ramah, then since your hands were casted downward from the beginning of Netillas Yadayim, when you first poured the mayim rishonim, haloi meikara lo yatsa mayim klal chutz leperik. So then it was impossible for the water to ever flow upwards beyond your wrist. Water doesn't flow up. Water only flows down. Ice cut in Zion. The Ramah said that you have to keep your hand down mitchilosai from the beginning of the Netillas Yadayim, from when you first pour the mayim rishonim, ad soifa, until the end. Says the Mishnah Berurah ad soifa. What does that mean? Hainu ad akar nesinas mayim shneim, meaning until after you pour the mayim shneim, right? Keep your hands down the whole time. Aval achakach, but after you washed the mayim shneim, after you poured the mayim shneim on your hands, shaper dami afla hakbia kaidam aniguv. You could, if you keep your hand down, you wash mayim rishon, then you wash mayim shneim. Now you could pick your hand up because what's the problem? You poured mayim rishonim, right? Now you poured mayim shneim. So the mayim shneim are going to hit anywhere where the mayim rishonim went. So that's all tar now. Now if you pick your hand up, the only water that can flow off your hand back over your wrist, all that mayim is tar. What's the problem? You got no problem. And then you're going to dry it all off. So there's no problem. Now let's go back into the Ramah. Continues the Ramah, second line down, a little bit before the middle of the line, by the Ice Cut and Ches from the Mishnah Berurah. Rak, the only concern is, Rak means only, Rak, the only concern is, sheyizaher, that you should take care, shalo yagbia tchila rashe etzba isav, that you shouldn't lift your hand up first after washing the mayim rishonim, v'achakach yashpilem, and then lower it before you wash the mayim shneim. The oz yetzu amayim chutz laperek, because if you do that, if you pick up your hand after the mayim rishonim, so now tamei mayim rishonim could flow back over your wrist, and then you put your hand down, v'yatzru v'yitamei yadayim, then it could flow back down after the mayim shneim and be rimatame your hands. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Rak Sheyizayir, Ritzayin Lamar. What the Mechaber wants to say, what the Ramah wants to say is, Demad Isa b'Gemara detzarach lagbia yadav. When the Bryce in Masechta Saita says that you need to lift up your hands, Hainu, when is that true? Hainu imahaya makazikam bagba. If you were holding your hand up, be'es desinas mayim rishonim, at the time that you poured the mayim rishonim, and says the Chavetz Chaim in the brackets, or even if you held your hands flat when you poured the mayim rishonim, then we have room to be chayshish that maybe some of the water, the mayim rishonim, that landed on your hand by the first pour flowed down and went over your wrist. Therefore, so then the Brisa says, since at some point you had your hand elevated, or at least flat, then we have a chash that some mayim rishonim might have gone over the wrist. So now you have to keep your hand up. So it shouldn't flow back onto your hand. But if you had your hand down the whole time, so then there was never a concern. If your hands were down the whole time, there was never room for a concern that the water went up over the wrist, because water doesn't flow up. Continues the Ramah. Oh no, we have a little bit more. We can do Mishnah Berurah's cut test. Let's cut test. Yadayim. Again, the fear is that then at some point water flowed over the wrist, and then it flowed back down onto the hands, and it was rimatami the hands. So, in order to understand Mishnah Berurah's cut test, so the Ramah said the eitz of the mechaber, and really it's the eitz of the brisa. It's not the eitz of the mechaber. This eitz of hagbas yadayim, of lifting up the hand, really seems very overly complicated. A much simpler eitzah would just seem to be and especially since, we learned the Mishnah Berurah yesterday, who says that this whole thing of being makbiyah the yadayim is impossible to do unless you have somebody else who's available to pour the Netillas Yadayim for you. Because if you have to pour the Netillas Yadayim by yourself, how are you going to do this? You're going to pour mayim rishonim on your right hand, right? Then you're going to pour mayim shniyim on your right hand. Now you have to pick your right hand up. Because if you put your right hand down, we're afraid some of the tummy mayim rishonim over your wrist might flow back. So you have to keep your hand up. How are you supposed to go pick up the keli to wash Netillas Yadayim in your left hand? You're supposed to go like this and pick it up, and then what? How are you going to pour? So the Mishnah Berurah said, unless you have another person to pour Netillas Yadayim for you, this is not practical. So the Ramah is like, what do we need this whole impractical eitzah for? There's a much simpler eitzah. Just say, when you wash Netillas Yadayim, keep your hand down the whole time. That way we never have to worry that mayim rishonim water that picked up tumah flowed above the wrist. So now the Mishnah Berurah sheds some light on why the Ramah is not necessarily a great eitzah. Says the Mishnah Berurah's cut and test. Many Akrainim take issue with this eitzah of the Ramah of keeping your hand down the entire time. Mitam, for the reason, because when your hands are cast downward lamata, efshir shelo yagiu hamayim klal al roshei ha'etzbos. They're worried that if you keep your hand down the entire time, you might run into a different problem. And that problem is, maybe you'll never get water on your fingertips. If your hands are cast down and you pour water like this, the water is going to flow down, but who says the water is going to get on the surface of your fingertips that are facing downward? The water is coming from up above. Who says we're ever going to get water over there? So says the Mishnah Berurah, if the hands are mamish cast downwards, after it's possible that the water will never get onto the fingertips. And therefore these Achrayim say, it is proper to keep the hands up, even during the first pour, when you pour the mayim harishonim. The Chain Hevi HaMagen Avram, and the Magen Avram brings down, Shekenu Gam Ken Al Pi Kabbalah, that Al Pi Kabbalah also Hagba Dafka. You're supposed to have your hands facing upwards when you pour Netillas Yadayim. V'chein b'Gemara, and so too again in the Gemara in Saita, Samchu Al Zeh Mikra, we have an asmachta, we have a support for this idea that the hands should be upwards during Netillas Yadayim from a pasuk in Yeshaya that says, Vayinatlem Vayinasem. Yeshaya Samach Gimel Tes. I wanted to look up this pasuk earlier, and I did not. Samach Gimel pasuk Tes. Bechal Tzarasam Loitzar. In all of the tzaras of Klal Yisrael. Bechal Tzarasam. In all of the tzaras of Klal Yisrael. Like now. B'chol tzarasam Loi tsar. There is tzara to the Rabbeinu Shalom. B'chol tzarasam. In all of their tzaras, in all of Klal Yisrael's tzaras, loi, with the vav. Loi tsar. There's tsar to the Rabbeinu Shalom. Everything that's going on now, the Rabbeinu Shalom is b'tzar. The Rabbeinu Shalom is b'tzar. You think you're b'tzar? The Rabbeinu Shalom is b'tzar. B'chol tzarasam loi tsar. Umalach panav. Where is it? V'chol tzarasam. Where did it go? Here it is. V'chol tzarasam loitzar. Umalach panav hoishiam. And therefore he sends a malach to save Klal Yisrael. Be'ahavasai, with his love. U'bechemlasai, and with his rachmanas. Hu ga'olam, he redeems Klal Yisrael. Vayenatleim, and he picks them up. Vayenasem, and he carries them. Kol yemei olam, for all of the days of the world. So vayenatleim, vayenasem, in the pasuk of Yeshaya, is mamish in Yonah D'Yoma. We hope the Rebbeinu should bring the Geula Shleima. Vayenatleim, vayenasem is referring to the Rebbeinu Shalom uplifting us and carrying us, but the Gemara in Saita uses it as a remez to the Netilas Yadayim, Vayenatleim, that by Netilas Yadayim, Vayenasem, the hands should be up. So I'll pick Kabbalah. So what did the Mishnah Berurah say here so far? We have the eights of the Ramah to avoid this whole problem of backflow of Tamei Mayim and Rishainim. The eights of the Ramah was keep your hands down from the beginning to the end. Says the Mishnah Berurah, a lot of Achronim don't like that idea because if you keep your hands down, you might not get water of the Netilas Yadayim on the fingertips. The Ramah says that the Magen Avram indeed says that we should not do that. We should make sure to keep our hands up. And also, al pi Kabbalah, from this pasuk, Vayenatleim, Vayenasem, it's brought down that we should have our hands up. V'hine, continues the Mishnah Berurah, he says, V'hine kahayoim, nowadays, now that we've gone through all of this nitty-gritty, says the Mishnah Berurah, nowadays we don't find that people are medactic to lift up their hands after the Mayim Shniyim because of this concern of backflow of Tamei Mayim Rishon. V'atam, and the reason is Memnei Shenoitl and Revius, I'll call Yad V'Yad. One very powerful reason why we're not makbid on this is because we're going to see yet today in the Mechaber. The Mechaber says, if you wash with a revius, you don't have a problem. Because once you pour a revius on your hand, so the tumah is gone. Once you're using a revius, there is no mayim or rishonim that's tameh. If you pour a revius b'basachas, like we've said many times, the tumah goes puff. There's no more tumah. The tumah's gone. So then there's no problem of mayim or rishonim tmeim that might flow back onto the hands. There are no mayim or rishonim tmeim. So that's one reason, says the Mishnah Berurah, why nowadays we're not makbid on this. The next reason, says the Mishnah Berurah, is v'gam shenoitlin ad soif pisas hayad. Now, I want to point out to you, v'gam shenoitlin ad soif pisas hayad. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 words in the Mishnah Berurah with no explanation. And the Mishnah Berurah says, another reason why we don't have to be makpid on this inyan of Akbas Yadayim is because we wash out of perek. Okay, so what? So what? According to the Rav Mefarshim, if you wash all the way into the perek, you still have this concern, and you still need Akbas Yadayim. The meaning of the Mishnah Berurah is what I told you at the outset of the shir. The whole Akdama at the beginning of the shir. There's 2 reasons why you don't have to be a makbid. One reason you don't have to be makbid is because you're washing with a revius. And if you wash with a revius, there's no possibility of mayim harishonim tmeim. But there's a catch. The catch is that the Rashba, guess what? The Rashba holds that even if you wash with a revius, the mayim harishonim still have tumah in them. So now what do you do according to the Rashba? The answer is that, you're going to go like the Rashba? Well, according to the Rashba, remember what I said at the outset of this year. According to the Rashba, you only have to wash at Kishrei Etzba'isav. But if you paskin like the Rashba, so if you washed with a revius, there's still Tumah, really you're only mechuyev to wash at Kishrei Etzba'isav, but you washed all the way until the Perek. According to the Rashba, if you wash all the way according to the Perek, there's no need for Akbas Yadayim, because he doesn't believe in this chash that water is going to flow from the hand above the wrist and then come back again. So with these two reasons, you're covering all your bases. If on the one hand, if you don't paskin like the Rashba, if you wash with a revius, there's no possibility of Mayim or Rishayim Tameim, because you washed with a revius. Once you wash with a revius, the Mayim or Rishayim aren't Tamei. If you go like the Rashba, and now you're worried that even if you wash with a revius, the Mayim or Rishayim are Tamei, okay, but you're washing out a Perek. And according to the Rashba, if you wash out a Perek, there's no Kshash. So you covered all your bases. I would just tell you, I don't have time to do it now, but if you want to look inside, take a look back on Nun Vav Amud Beis in Sharet Tzion, Ice Cotton Hay, where he goes through some of this. Weiter in the Mishnah Berurah. We come up, nevertheless, Nachain Lashgiach, the Mishnah Berurah is emphasizing again what he mentioned above. When we come Nachain Lashgiach, it is proper to take care and pay attention that when you pour Netillas Yadayim water, the water should get on all of your fingers. It should get on the fingertips. It should get on all the sides of the fingers. Not like most people who tend to wash Netillas Yadayim only on the side of their hand. See, a lot of people, they take the kais of Netillas Yadayim, they have their hand like this, and they pour over it. So the water getting everywhere? If you have your hand like this and you pour like this, is the water getting around the finger and getting over here and getting here and here and here and here? And is it getting here? Says the Mishnah Berurah, you got to be careful that when you pour Netillas Yadayim, you're getting the water over all of your hands and your fingers and all the surfaces. So not like the Hamoinam, who are not careful, ve'enam mashkichim, they're not careful, that the water should also get on the fingertips, and around the entire hand. Okay, let's go further over here. Now we're back 3 lines down in the Shulchan Aruch, near the end of the line, back to the words of the Mechaber. Says the Mechaber, V'hainu, this whole chash that I'm telling you about the need for Akbaz Yadayim, because the water might flow back. V'hainu kisheinu noitel kalayad ad mekayim chibar hayad im azroya. Says the Mishnah Berurah, and this is where you see that according to the Shitas HaRashba, if you wash up to the wrist, you don't have a problem. It's in the words of the Mechaber. The Mechaber says, V'hainu, this whole chash, that we're worried about water flowing back and then coming back onto the hand again and making a problem, that's only a problem if you don't wash all the way to the wrist. But if you wash all the way up to the wrist, you don't have to pick up your hands. What's the Mechaber saying here? The Mechaber is paskening like the Rashba. What the Mechaber is telling you is, since I pasken like the Rashba, that you're only mechuyev to wash ad kishrei etzba'osav. In the world of the Rashba, the risk that we're dealing with over here is a very severe risk. But at the same time, if you wash all the way to the wrist, then the Rashba holds that there's no problem at all, because he doesn't believe in this chash that the water might flow back. Says the Mishnah Berurah, cutting yod avalim noitel hatam kasavno le'el ba'is aleph ayin sham. That's where he discusses this in the Hakdama back on Nun Vav Amud Beis. And you could see that. I'll just point you to where it is in case you want to review it. It's on Nun Vav Amud Beis, 3 lines down in the wide lines of the Mishnah Berurah, right by the ice cotton dalid for the Sharet Tzion, where the Mishnah Berurah says, V'yesh cholkin. There are those who disagree, usviraluhu, and they hold, the kishanoitel kol pisas hayad ad akoneh kiminogenu, that if you wash the entire hand up to the wrist like our minig, Loi chayshinon. We're not concerned shema yetzu amayim chutz lamakam hazeh v'yichazru. We're not concerned that the water is going to go beyond the wrist and then come back. That's the Shitas HaRashba. And that's what the Mechaber says over here. V'hainu kishein noitel kol yadim v'kol b'chibar yadim azroya. Avalim noitel ad sham einu tzarech lag bia yodav. Going back into the Mechaber, 4 lines down, end of the line, the words of the Ramah, v'yesh cholkim bazeh, but there are those who disagree. Mishnah Berurah is cutting it aleph, v'yesh cholkim bazeh. This is the yesh b'farshim. V'svir lehu, they hold, to la'olam tzarech lag bia yodav, that you always have to lift up your hand, even if you wash it till the wrist. V'aynu be'el Yerabah shekasav the ikar kayesh cholkim hazeh. The El Yerabah says that the ikar halacha is like the roiv mefarshim. V'hudas roiv ha-mefarshim. U'mikamakim nevertheless b'shas atchak kishi'ef shaloi lahagbia. If you don't have the, if you can't lift up your hand, like you don't have somebody else to point Netillas Yadayim for you, yesh lisbay chaldea rishayna. We could rely on the Shitas HaRashba, Shasasam HaMechaber Kavasei Lekula, Ubepracha Anu Noitlin Revius Mayim. Weiter in the Shulchan Aruch now, in the words of the Mechaber, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 lines up from the bottom, near the beginning of the line. V'chein, similarly, Im Shafach Al Shtei Yodav Revius B'Pamachas, if you pour an entire revius of water on both of your hands at one time, meaning you have somebody else to pour Netillas Yadayim for you, and he takes a whole revius and he pours it on both hands. Kevan de ein shamayim timeim klal. Now the tumah goes puff, and there's no mayim or rishayim timeim. Eino tzarech lag b'yadav. You don't have to worry about all of this sif. Again, if you wash with a full revius, no problem. V'chein, and similarly, hamat bil yadav. If you do tvilas yadayim, if you immerse your hands for tahara, instead of doing Netillas Yadayim, eino tzarech lag b'yadav. Because again, when you use a mikveh, when you immerse your hands, there's no tamei mayim or rishonim. Just like when you go into a mikveh, the tumah goes off you, and it doesn't go into the water in a mikveh. When you immerse your hands, the tumah doesn't go off your hands and go into the water. The tumah vanishes. So if you use tfilas yadayim, again, there's no shash. Because the whole shash is predicated on having mayim or rishonim that's tamei. Says the Mishnah Berurah, ois cotton yud beis, al shtei yodav revius. If you pour a revius on both hands, you don't have a problem. The choshked certainly im shafach revius al kol yad. Certainly, if instead of pouring one revius on both hands, you pour a revius on each hand, certainly you have no problem. Ois cotton yud gimel b'pamachas. If you pour one revius on the hands at one time, ve'ech yitzur zeh, how could you possibly do this? Pour a full revius on both of your hands at one time. We'll discuss it in Sif Dalet. Ice cotton your Dalet. In these cases, you have no concern. Why? Because if you use a full revius, so then there's no mayim rishonim tameim. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cutting your Dalet. There ain't shamayim tameim. The madar minan mayim rishonim tameim. This whole idea that we say that mayim rishonim becomes tamei from the hands. And that's why you have to pick up your hand, because of a chash that the mayim rishayim tamei might flow back onto your hands. That's only if you don't wash the Netillas Yadayim with a full revius at one time, so that the mayim tameim, the mayim rishayim are tamei. But if you wash with a revius babasakas, the mayim rishayim are not tamei. So to somebody who does tfilas yadayim instead of Netillas Yadayim, again, you have no concern, because then there's no mayim rishonim tameim. Finally, says the Ramah, 3 lines down from the bottom near the end of the line, Yesh Oimrim de'im shayfech al yadav shalish pa'amim. And this is going to be interesting. There is a Yesh Oimrim that says, if you wash not just mayim rishonim and mayim shniim, if you wash 3 times each hand, mayim rishonim, mayim shniim, mayim shlishim, yesh oimrim, dem shayfech al yadav shalish pabim, if you pour water on your hands 3 times, ain't tzarech lizar b'chal zeh. That's another way out of all of this. If you wash 3 times, you don't have to worry. V'chein nagu lahakal, and we're noig to be makel. Okay, what does the Mishnah Berurah mean? So what the Mishnah Berurah means is like this, and I'm just, before I even read it inside, it would be ice cut and tesvav, just understand what he's saying. What he's saying is like this. We're going back to the world of the Rashba. In the world of the Rashba, what's the big risk? In the world of the Rashba, and it's a great risk, the risk is you tried to wash Mayim Rishonim until here. But inevitably you overpoured a little bit, and the Mayim Rishonim went until here. Now we're afraid that when you wash Mayim Shneim, the Mayim Shneim might only go until here. In that case, you have Mayim Rishonim Timeim over here that could flow back onto the fingers. Says the Ramah, you know what? If you wash Mayim Rishonim, Mayim Shneim, and Mayim Shlishim, we're not going to be afraid. Why? Because, says the Ramah, if you washed 3 times, by the time you washed the 3rd time, we could already assume that either the Mayim Shneim or the Mayim Shlishim took care of any Mayim Rishonim Tameim that were on the hand. If you only wash Mayim Rishonim and Mayim Shneim, so we can be chayshish that the Mayim Rishonim went until here, and the Mayim Shneim went only until here. But if then you washed Mayim Shlishim also, we're not going to be chayshish that neither the Mayim Shneim nor the Mayim Shlishim took care of all the Mayim Rishonim. That vite, we're not going to go. Says the Mishnah Berurah, is cutting Tesvav, Tezayin, v'chein nagul hakel, v'yoyser nachayin, but when all the dust settles, the Mishnah Berurah says, v'yoyser nachayin linoig, the best way to be noig is, im yesh loy mayim, if you have plenty of water, sheyatel revius al kol yad v'yad o yoyser, pour a whole revius or more on each hand, sheyavayu amayim aleim b'shefi, so that you have plenty of water coming onto the hands. The chanal b'simin kufton ches, u'memelo lo yitztarech l'daktik, baka bak basam, b'dina the chanal, and then you have no problem. Wash with plenty of water, you have no problem. V'chein muchech b'chayadam, ta'alei tzizu d'shalish pamim, efakfikin kamach reinim, because this eitz of pouring 3 times, not everybody likes it. And, okay, Baruch Hashem, we made it through Siman Kuf Samach Beis Sif Aleph. Wasn't easy, but I hope I did a good job of delivering it. To some, it might have been overly repetitious. To some, it might have been overly confusing. I'm not sure. I hope the Rosh Hashanah gave me siyata d'shmaya to do a good job. And Mirz Hashem, we'll go weiter next time. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. Schos of limud HaTorah should be megan against Klal Yisrael. The Rosh Hashanah should send Yeshua's refuahs parnasit shidduchim to those in need. We should be zeichet to see the BS Kal Tzedek. B'mehera v'yameinu, amen. Be well.